Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sung-Hoon Kim, and I'd like to welcome you to the International Civil Aviation Organization's 40th Assembly SkyTalks. Over the course of a 2-week period, we have 68 presentations provided to you from industry professionals, and I would like to invite you to the ICAO channel on YouTube for more information. Today, we have, as a subject matter, we will be talking about the No Country Left Behind initiative. The title of the presentation is Integrated Staffing and Training Roadmap for Inspectors. And the presenter today would be Dunia Abboud, Associate Analysis Officer for the Integrated Aviation Analysis Section. Please welcome Dunia Abboud.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. So if your country or your civil aviation authority is struggling to manage to find a proper methodology to come up with the proper number of inspectors needed for the conduct of seamless safety oversight activities, well, you are in the right place today. So I'll be talking about the Integrated Staffing and Training Roadmap for Inspectors. And you've probably heard of the No Country Left Behind initiative, which is here to highlight ICAO's efforts to assist states with the implementation of ICAO standards and recommended practices. And you've also probably heard of Implement, which is also an ICAO initiative that is there to help states adopt a data-driven decision-making approach in all their activities. So basically, iSTRI is part of those two initiatives because, on the one hand, it helps states with implementing or coming up with a proper methodology to estimate the number of inspectors that they need while using a data-driven approach. So ultimately, the result is that states are able to resolve certain protocol questions that you can find in the Universal Safety Oversight Audit Program of ICAO. So here is a map where the countries that are highlighted are actually the countries that currently have a proper mechanism in place to ensure that they have sufficient staff to meet their international and national obligations. So what you see is that currently only 74 states do have such a methodology in place, while 111 states still do not. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that USOAP audits results show us that many states still do not have or still are struggling greatly to determine the number of staff that they need. And if you want to be a little bit more specific, to this day, it has been very clear in USOAP audit results that not having a sufficient number of inspectors needed is, to this day, a big issue and a recurrent finding. So during the 39th Assembly session, member states have actually come to ICAO to specifically vocalize their need for guidance on the resourcing and restructuring of their civil aviation authorities. And for that reason, ICAO decided to establish an expert working group from states and from ICAO, so you had experts both from ICAO and from member states, to define a specific, a clear methodology and the simple and general model to estimate the number of staff that was required for their civil aviation authorities. So the outcome of the discussions and the outcome of those meetings with those different experts coming from both ICAO and member states was the Civil Aviation Authority Human Resource Toolkit, which contains a number of applications that I'll get into more detail in the next few slides. And so all these tools that help states estimate the number of inspectors that they need, essentially, they're not so easy to use because they require, well, to collect the right amount of information, and then they also require to analyze the results that you obtain through the use of these applications. All of this, well, states told us that they needed further assistance, and that's why we came up with the Integrated Staffing and Training Roadmap for Inspectors, which is iSTRI. And so this iSTRI initiative really provides a framework for states to follow so that they can ultimately have a sufficient number of competent inspectors. So where do you find the CAHR toolkit? The CAHR toolkit, you find it in the Integrated Safety Trend Analysis and Reporting System, which stands for iSTARS. So it's a web-based system that you find in the ICAO Secure portal, and the advantage of it is that it provides a really quick and convenient interface to many different types of applications and data sets that are specific to states and that provide safety, efficiency, and risk analyses. So the first component of the CAHR toolkit is the benchmarking tool. And this benchmarking tool, what it does is that it helps the state, or actually it enables the state to compare its numbers of safety oversight inspectors with the numbers of safety oversight inspectors of countries that happen to have similar operating environments. So this is really a tool for benchmarking purposes, as its name indicates, and essentially it's a sort of first step to determine whether you need to use the manpower planning tool. So if, let's say, you have a certain number of inspectors and states with similar operating environments have many more, so there's a problem, and then that justifies the need to use the manpower planning tool. So the manpower planning tool is actually at the core of both the CAHR toolkit and the iSTRI initiative, and it's essentially a very complex, or not so complex, calculator that enables states to estimate the number of inspectors that they need. And I'll share a few more details about this application in the next few slides. So the third also component is a organizational structure library. So essentially here there is a growing number of different case studies of states that have proven through their results, their USOAP effective implementation scores, that they have sound organizational structures. And so this library, states can use it for consultation purposes, maybe to see how did some states manage to deal with certain issues and how did they resolve those problems, and so on and so forth. So basically, now I'll be talking a little bit about the manpower planning tool, which is, as I mentioned earlier, really at the core of iSTRI and the CAHR toolkit. So this manpower planning tool, what it does is that it calculates the man hours and the number of inspectors that are needed to carry out seamless safety oversight activities. It's a convenient tool because it also includes a risk-based approach to surveillance activities. And it's also, that's something that you need to keep in mind. It's really designed for small to medium-sized states, because states with a very complex operating environment will need a tool that is better able to grasp the complexity of that operating environment. What you need to keep in mind as well is that ICAO is collecting and will continue to collect data over time. So all the different sessions that will be filled in will be used to improve the current version of the tool. So on the one hand, to make it more comprehensive, and on the other hand, also to essentially respond in a better way to states' needs. So one of the improvements, for example, is that we've already conducted a few missions, and we've realized that many states do not have a reliable internet connection. So what we decided to do is that we decided to create an offline version of the tool that will be available by the end of November, beginning of December, and that will actually constitute a great solution for states because, well, if they don't have a reliable internet connection, they can still use the tool. So how does this tool work? Well, it takes into account a few assumptions and a few notions. The first assumption is that it assumes that inspectors address three types of activities: certification, surveillance, and aircraft oversight activities. It actually represent maybe the core of an inspector's work, but also to counter this limitation, the tool also considers that there is an overhead. And by overhead, what we mean is the percentage of time that an inspector spends performing activities that are not directly related to surveillance activities. So, for example, this can be administrative tasks such as the reporting, the filing of reports, or, for example, the travel time that an inspector will have to include to its working hours as well. So the third concept that it uses is that it uses the notion of man-hours and full-time equivalents. So you are probably familiar with these notions. Full-time equivalents, essentially one full-time equivalent, or FTE, is equivalent to one person working full-time. So the tool covers 5 areas currently: the area of operation, the area of airworthiness, the area of personnel licensing, aerodromes, and air navigation services. Over time, the goal is really to make this tool more comprehensive. And it uses the notion of multipliers. So by multipliers, we mean that certain activities, specifically surveillance activities, an inspector will perhaps have to conduct more or less activities on a certain organization, specifically depending on some external factors. And those external factors, for example, can be the compliance level of an organization or the fleet size of an air operator. These are just a few examples. And finally, what this tool is also containing is a default profile. So states, if they choose to use this application, well, they can rely on this default profile as an example to, well, complete, and create their own session. So the tool structure, the tool is set up in the following way. First, there's the setup, which asks for information about your industry structure, the complexity of your operating environment, the size, the scope of your aviation industry. All this information, you find it in the setup. In the calculations, you're going to be asked to introduce information about the working hours of your inspectors, the types of activities that they perform, and the time allocated to each one of these activities. And finally, the summary will be, well, a summary of calculations. So using all this information entered, you will be able to see how many inspectors you need for the 5 different areas. Okay? So this is how the manpower planning is calculated in the manpower planning tool. So for certification activities, it's fairly simple. Number of activities multiplied by man-hours per activity. And all of this is divided by the yearly man-hours per inspector. And then surveillance activities, you add the concept of multiplier because, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few external factors that might influence the rate at which you will be performing these surveillance activities. So now that you know how the manpower planning tool works, you need to keep in mind that the tool provides an estimate number of inspectors needed, not the exact number. And so you need to analyze these results. You need to be able to perform, a gap analysis, understand, and really use a critical eye when you're looking at those results. And so also you have to keep in mind that many states have their own manpower planning calculations and methodologies that are also very correct, maybe, a little bit more complex. This is really a general and a basic tool that states can rely on when they actually do not have a methodology in place and that they're struggling to come up with a proper methodology. So, as I mentioned earlier, the tool really needs accompanying actually it needs ICAO to accompany the state through a number of steps because it relies on collecting relevant information, using the tool, and then analyzing all these results to be able to provide conclusions and recommendations. And so that's why we have developed the integrated staffing and training roadmap for inspectors. So this is what the roadmap looks like, the process. So it goes from, well, the state can contact us directly because they realize that they need assistance. Or sometimes also what happens is that the regional office will come to us with a list of states that we will contact, and then we can, establish contact. And so once this contact is established, the state will nominate a focal point who will have more or less 1 month to collect the necessary information. And once this information is collected, then there is a 5-day on-site assistance mission, or also a workshop, where so a regional officer who is an expert and a tool expert will travel all the way to the country to perform a number of steps along with the state. So the first step, obviously, is to review all that data collected, to make sure that is all the information necessary included? Is there anything missing? Do we need to engage in certain discussions with a few people or parties involved, maybe some inspectors, to understand what is missing? So all of this, usually it takes 1 to 2 days. And then once we have all this information properly collected, then we can use the Manpower planning tool. So that takes more or less 1 day. We use the Manpower planning tool. We obtain the estimate number of inspectors needed. And so what do you do with those numbers? Well, great, you have the estimates, but now you need to analyze those estimates. So you're going to perform a gap analysis. How do you perform that gap analysis? You look at your current numbers, you look at what the tool is telling you that you need to have, and you do a comparative analysis. Perhaps you start identifying some people if, let's say, you see that you are missing a certain number of inspectors. Maybe you know someone who is retired who could perform some of the activities. Maybe you know you're in a good relation with your neighbor states, and you could maybe also exchange resources, and so on and so forth. So all of this, at the end, you get very specific conclusions and recommendations on what are the next steps so you can get a proper number of inspectors needed. So once that's done, ICAO leaves, and the state has more or less 1 to 3 months to develop or to draft an HR status report that contains all the findings, all the conclusions, all the recommendations. And if the state needs ICAO's assistance, well, the experts who traveled are also available for any remote assistance that may be needed. At the end, well, you have an HR status report that is pretty comprehensive, and out of that status report, you can develop an action plan. Eventually, if you are able to implement that action plan, well, you will have a sufficient number of competent inspectors. So these are the workshops that we have conducted, that we will be conducting in the future. So we already conducted 2 pilot on-site assistance missions in Burkina Faso and in Thailand. And so the results have proven to be pretty reliable. And also the framework offered by the iSTRI initiative has proven to be very useful for states because we ask the right questions, we engage in discussions. Sometimes you put everyone together, it's already huge. And so we already planned 2 regional workshops in the West and Central African region and East and Southern African region. We don't have the dates yet, but there will be 2 workshops for states to attend. And our next state-by-state workshop will be in Indonesia in December 2019, and there we will be testing the offline version of the tool. So these are my closing remarks. Why is this method useful? It's useful because it is really intended to be a basic, generic tool that can help states determine an action plan for the recruitment of safety oversight inspectors. It's useful because it can be used in a periodical basis and enhanced over time. So let's say a state can look at this methodology, this very simple methodology, and over time, once it's starting to better understand what is going on in its country, the complexity of its operating environment, it can start including all these elements into this basic methodology, ultimately to build their own tool. So if your organization is still struggling in finding the right number of inspectors needed for safety oversight activities, well, iSTRI is a very good starting point. And also, again, I'd like to mention that iSTRI is a new tool, and over time it will continue to improve based on the feedback that we will obtain from states, from the on-site assistance missions and the workshops that we have been and will be conducting in the future. So I'd like to close my talk by reminding you that all these things that we do, it's really essentially to leave or to make sure that no country is left behind. If you need a few more information, or if you're interested in conducting such the iSTRI process in your country, you can feel free to contact me, or if you need more information, you can visit the public website page. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Please step up to the mic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a very good presentation and time demand issue on how to calculate the inspectors. So when I visited the iSTAR website, I have the access of that. When calculating the ANS inspectors, you know, the ANS side, you have 7 sub-areas, the ATS, CNS,
yes,
and PENSOP, all the 7. So in the iSTAR website, I did not find any example of that so that we can use for the ENS area. But we can find other areas like ops fail and airworthiness. It is easy to calculate, but the ENS is a bit complex. So could you please give more information about how to calculate all ANS area?
Well, that's actually a very good comment, and we already were asked to maybe, cater the tool so it can respond to ANS needs. And so we do have a few examples, so templates that are available that, are actually the product of states using the application. I will be happy to share that with you. But also keep in mind that we're trying to make the tool a little bit more complex as well. So we will be at some point able to really divide the ANS area into its more, complex reality. So yeah, that's.
I have another question for you. The inspectors not only have the surveillance activities and not only for the certification and licensing, they have another works for documentation. For example, they have to engage their time with the developing the regulations, and other you term it as a overhead in this calculation. So I found that you suggested it is 15% more or less of total working hour. So how you calculate, what is the real basis of this calculation?
So we, the template that we use is based on a South American study. It's a little bit of the average of the results for different states, but it's really essentially up to the state to really be able to determine how much time is spent performing non-inspector work. Obviously, it is not so easy. That's why also we have these on-site assistance missions where we have the expert who asks, the right questions so states can understand. this type of information. However, also, this tool will continue to expand and evolve. So for now, it covers 3 main activities. In the future, it will be able to cover other activities as well, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Any other questions?
Well, thank you for a very informative presentation.
Thank you.
So for more information, once again, please contact iSTRI at ICAO.int. Thank you.